Good morning, everyone. I'm Chai Kim. Thank you for joining today's e-seminar organized by NUS Library. The topic of this talk is collecting and research on the Chinese in Southeast Asia. This seminar examines these historical synergies and the implications and challenges for the fields of collecting, education, and research in the fields of business and socio-cultural history in Southeast Asia, especially with regards to the Chinese in Southeast Asia, but also related to other communities and Southeast Asia as a whole. The three speakers will discuss the different aspects of these synergies and the importance of NUS Libraries collections to their research on the Chinese in Southeast Asia. Today's moderator is Dr. Jack Chia. He's Assistant Professor of History and Religions Studies at NUS. His research focuses on Buddhism and Chinese popular religion in Southeast Asia, transnational Buddhism, and Sino-Southeast Asia interaction. His first book, Monks in Motion, Buddhism and Modernity Across the South China Sea, won the 2021 Euroseas Humanities Books Prize. He has also published articles in journals such as China Quarterly, Contemporary Buddhism, History of Religions, and the Journal of Chinese Religions. Dr. Chia, please, I will hand the session over to you. The floor is yours.
Right. Thank you very much for the kind and generous introduction, Chai Kim. Very good morning to everyone. Welcome to the Collecting and Research on the Chinese in Southeast Asia, Intertwined Histories, Synergies, and Futures e-seminar. My name is Jack Chia, and I'm an assistant professor here in NUS. I want to begin by thanking the NUS Libraries for organizing this exciting event, and to Chai Kim and Rani for putting together this event. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank two NUS librarians, Mr. Tim Yap Fan and Mr. Lim Peng Siang, who has now retired, for all the help and the support they've given me over the years. I'm very honored to be the moderator of this e-seminar, which will examine the intertwined history of research, collecting, and education in the Southeast Asian region, and consider the close ties between scholars, students, and libraries. We are very fortunate today to have three speakers from the Nanyang Technological University with us to discuss different aspects of these synergies and the importance of NUS libraries and libraries in the Pura to the research and the Chinese in Southeast Asia. As the moderator and timekeeper for the seminar, let's start off with some housekeeping rules. This speaker will have about 25 minutes for presentation. Unlike in a face-to-face workshop, could I remind the audience to please mute your mic? Thank you. Unlike in a face-to-face workshop where the moderator can show the remaining time on the card, it is difficult to do so in an online event where our faces are reduced to small boxes on Zoom. Therefore, as a scholar of Buddhism, I will strike the wooden fish once, 2 minutes before the time is up, and twice when your time is up. May I also remind our audience to please mute yourself during the presentations. You are welcome to post your questions and comments for our panelists in the chat box below. Without further ado, I will introduce the first speaker, my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Koh Keng We. Dr. Koh is an assistant professor of history at NTU. His research interests include Asian and comparative business history, maritime trade, Southeast Asian history, Chinese religions and comparative religions, Asian migration and comparative diasporas, colonialism, colonial knowledge formation, state formations, and world history. His presentation is entitled Collecting and Research on the Chinese in Southeast Asia, Intertwined Histories, Synergies, and Futures. The floor is yours, Keng We.
Thank you, Jack, for the very kind introduction. And like Jack, I would like to express my thanks to NUS Libraries for organizing this, especially to Chai Kim and Rani. And then I would like to thank Jack for chairing the session, taking time from his very busy schedule, especially with all the activities surrounding his new book, Monks in Motion, and taking time to do this. And then also I would like to thank Jeremy and Esmond for speaking with me to share their experiences of using the NUS libraries for their research and writing, right? So like Jack, right, I would like to express my thanks to librarians at NUS who have helped me in the past. Of course, my undergraduate and master's degrees were at NUS, and of course, during this period, NUS Libraries was like a second home to me, and I've benefited from the help of many of the librarians, and not only my master's. Even during the writing of my PhD thesis, I was based at RE, and of course, when you're at RE, NUS Libraries is just, at that time, was it? I was several buildings away, but still very close by. So I would like to thank librarians from NUS Libraries like Mr. Lee Ching Seng, Mr. Tim Yap Fan, Mr. Sim Chun Peng, and then the newer, younger librarians like Chai Kim, and then Ling Guang and Herman and others. There are many others. I think I can speak for many other students from NUS and also other researchers from other parts of Singapore, from Singapore and other parts of the world who have used NUS libraries that we have really benefited, right? So today my talk, I better get started before Jack uses the fish on me. I'm just going to I think I'll be doing like, you know what they always say about preaching to the choir, in a sense that there are many people in this room who are much more experienced than me in terms of collection and development research. I guess I forgot to share my screen. Yeah, sorry, I just need to share my share screen. Okay. Yeah. So what I'm trying to, today, right, what I'll be basically trying to talk about will be sort of my ideas or my experiences about on collecting and research on the Chinese in Southeast Asia, collecting and researching the Chinese in Southeast Asia. So as I said, many of the things will be very familiar to you, I think. And I think there are many experts in the room who are more qualified than me in talking about all this. But I'm just like sharing my personal experiences, and as a sort of lead into the presentations by Jeremy and Esmond on this field. So these are the main themes that I'll be discussing, right? Talking about how like collecting and research on the Chinese in Southeast Asia has been sort of affected by the place of the Chinese overseas or ethnic Chinese, depending on how you want to call the term that you want to use, between Chinese studies and Southeast Asian studies. Right, that's, I think, has been a challenge, at least in the case of America, where I studied and worked. But I think it'd be interesting to see if these challenges were also faced here. Other things I would like to talk about would be like the sort of connections between collecting and research, and then knowing the field of collecting, knowing the field of production of knowledge that is very important for collecting, dealing with different media platforms of collecting, strategies of collecting, as well as collaborations in the past, present, and maybe in the future, right? My sites are rather simple, so there'll be things I'll be like adding on verbally, right, as I go along. So the question of like who collects on the Chinese in Southeast Asia, at least from my experience in working in the US and in the past has always been a big issue, right? Because sometimes when we go to the librarians, they are not sure, like, is it the field of the Chinese studies librarians or collections, or is it the field of the Southeast Asian studies collections or libraries, right? I have, like, there have been people who feel that the Chinese overseas shouldn't is the sort of responsibility of one or the other, right? So I'm also very interested whether this actually arises here. Then the other thing about collecting on the Chinese in Southeast Asia would be the challenge of language, right? So Southeast Asia, as we know, is a region with diverse languages, and not all collections on the Chinese in Southeast Asia are in Chinese languages, right? So we are dealing with the need for a very wide range of language expertise, right? And that is also a major challenge in collecting on the Chinese in Southeast Asia, especially if you want to collect region-wide, right? As I mentioned, perceptions of the Chinese in Southeast Asian studies is a major thing. I remember in the past I have, like, raised funds for digital for a database on a Chinese Indonesian collection, but I mean, then some Southeast Asian librarians were saying that, but this is not an important part of Southeast Asian studies. So perceptions of the place of the Chinese in Southeast Asian studies, in Southeast Asian politics, economy, I think also shapes the sort of collecting strategies. So so there are major, I mean, when you talk about Chinese Southeast Asian collections, there are several major collections in the world. The NUS Chinese Library and Southeast and Singapore Malaysian collections in NUS Libraries are perhaps one of the most important in Singapore, right? Alongside, of course, the collections in the National Library, National Archives, and IC's libraries, right? Of course, globally, right, there are several important centers, like in several American universities, like Ohio University Libraries with the Yuval Shao Center, the Library of Congress, Cornell University, and various other universities. They have quite good collections on the Chinese in Southeast Asia, but of course with maybe a certain focus on the Chinese in different countries depending on their specializations, right? Leiden University Libraries also has very important collections, both as this includes now, of course, the KITLV libraries, the Royal Institute for Southeast Asian and Caribbean Studies, as well as the Royal Institute of the Tropics, right? All the collections are now merged in Leiden University Libraries, where you also have the Chinese Indonesian Heritage Center and also a very interesting digitized collection on Sino-Malay literature. Then when moving on to China, right, there are several important repositories, right? But some of the most important would be like the Research School of Southeast Asian Studies in Xiamen University, which has a very, I mean, among other collections, like old publications from Penang, but also a very interesting collection of leftist newspapers from Southeast Asia in the 50s and 60s, which were brought there by Chinese who returned to China during that period in history, right? Then Xiamen University Libraries has also been working with this research school to sort of digitize this collection, and Xiamen University Libraries have been digitizing collections on Southeast Asia in the past. I think 10 to 20 years, as well as resources on the Xiamen history and the sort of overseas Chinese connections there. For those of you who are interested in more of the Cantonese side or even broader Chinese overseas studies collections, the Jiangmen Wu Yi Museum in Jiangmen in I think Guangdong, China, has also a very interesting collection, especially on the sort of connections with the Chinese in America, right? For those of you who are interested. but yes, Jinan University and Hong Kong University libraries are also some of the important repositories. Baptist University Library has a very interesting newspaper clippings database on the Chinese overseas, right? So these are possible, these are some of the major collections. And of course, we are not including the, we should also include the different research societies, private collections in Southeast Asia. For example, recently, I think last 10 years ago, they published many of the remittance letters belonging to a collector in Thailand. So these are some of the important things. So I think in terms of research and collecting, right, I think when I was studying the US and doing research in the Netherlands, and then also as I did more research on Southeast Asian history, right, you realize the sort of very close synergies between collecting and research on Southeast Asia, including the Chinese in Southeast Asia. Research societies had their libraries, and the members of these societies, the scholars, were very much involved in the collecting of materials, right? And then there were very strong synergies between research and collecting. I mean, you can look at the collections of Tan Yok Seong in Chen Yusong in the National Library, right? And also the collections of like the South Sea societies in the past, South Sea societies in Singapore, South Sea Society, and the Asia Research Society, right? So something very important, and which later I will maybe, if I have time, I will share some experiences, would be like the sort of accessibility to these collections, accessibility and sort of the importance of libraries taking into account the user's perspective and understanding in terms of making these resources accessible, and also in terms of collecting, in terms of building these collections. In terms of, I think what NUS Libraries has done very well is the other library guides that they have created, the sort of making materials accessible digitally, and not only accessible in terms of making them available online, but also organizing the resources, making it user-friendly in terms of searching and all that. And we have greatly benefited from this. So what I'm trying to say here in this slide is basically the need for greater engagement and collaboration between research and collecting. I think for NUS Libraries, they have always been engaging with the faculty and students. So it's something that is already there. There are already very strong foundations. But I was thinking more in terms like if such collaboration could be extended to like the National Library and other institutions in Singapore, right? So a very important part of collecting, whether it's for the Chinese or in Southeast Asia or for other things or for other subjects or Southeast Asia as a whole, would be to know the field, right? Who are the people doing the collecting? Not only looking at the individual collections in themselves or the institutions. So consortiums like COMOSI, then I think relatively newer like Southeast Asian Libraries Group in Europe have been playing very important roles. When I was working at the Yu Bao Xiao Center in Ohio Universities, I got the opportunity to sit in at COMOSI meetings, to engage with Library Congress Jakarta office on their collecting strategies. And you can see how much effort they make in knowing the field, knowing the landscape, not only in terms of research, but also in terms of the different producers in the field, publishers, small publishers, big publishers, knowing like what's being sold in the newsstands on a daily basis using some various sampling methods. So the sort of known, and so this sort of very proactive approach is something very important. Knowing the history of collecting and collection building is also very important, because when I was a graduate student in the University of Hawaii, I had a very, it was a very, an opportunity to index the archives of the bulletins of the COMOSI group from the 50s to 60s to the time I was doing it in the early 2000s. So through the librarian there, Yati, who also, as later I shall mention, helped me a lot in my research there as well, right? And so knowing the history of collecting, right, makes you realize how much effort was done in the past, right, to really systematize collecting and collecting with a view to the future. And a broad view of the future, not narrow, or this is my research area, I focus on this and that, but knowing the field and seeing whether how well the field is covered, right? So this is one very eye-opening experience I had while I was working at Ohio universities, but in my meetings at the Commerce group, where librarians like Ray Lam, Susan Goh, Judith Henchey, and Greg Green, and Jack, what's his assistant's name? Our friend.
Jeff.
Jeff. Jeff Peterson. Yeah. So yeah, and many others and Yati and Ellen Reedy from Hawaii as well. So when I look at the way they approach collection development, I always felt that I was always wondering whether in Singapore we are doing the same thing on the same collaborative level, right? With the same type of in-depth knowledge of the field in question, right? Yeah, so knowing, and they also knew like many of the private collection centers of publishing, the small centers, right? And they often traveled in a region to build networks on the ground. I mean, of course, funding permitting, but they are always often visiting, right? And then tapping on research networks, engagements with the region. I'm sure Jack would have the same experience. As graduate students, they always tell us, look out for things in the field, bring back as much as you can. Although they can't pay for our extra luggage, but yeah, but they are always trying to get us involved, you see. So so the strategies of collecting, like beyond vendors and relying on vendors or calls from people who have collections or of interest, they actually go out, right? They take the initiative to go out, know the field, engage with scholars, institutions, collectors, local institutions, right? Connecting with consortiums like Commerce, for example, but also like the Southeast Asian Libraries Group in Europe, and then creating a platform for this type of connections between research and collection building, right? Commerce and the SCALG are very good examples. I'm sure there are some parallels here. It'll be interesting to know more about them, because I think if the researchers know of such opportunities, we can also contribute to these type of research collection building programs. And then another important thing were exchange programs. I think rather than, I mean, if libraries have duplicates, having all these platforms and networks will allow better sort of distribution of collections and sort of reducing waste, right? So the one of the main challenges that we face is that a lot of content is of course being produced online nowadays, right? And then institutions are producing their own publications, which are not getting into vendor distribution channels because they are not for sale, simply not for sale. So then the question arises, like, how are we documenting and archiving such content, online content, or what some people call gray materials, right? What are the collecting strategies and protocols that are in place, right? That's something that as researchers, right, sometimes what I feel I'm interested in, I'm sure Jack will be interested in as well, and the other students and researchers, right? So that was the thing that struck me when I was in the US working there, and to a certain extent in Leiden, is that there was a lot of communication, right, between the librarians and the researchers, both ways, right? The initiative comes from both sides. So I'm wondering whether here we could do a bit more with that. But I mean, in NUS libraries, this communication has always been there in place. I think I'm thinking more about the broader landscape in Singapore. Right, databases are very important ways of like trying to map out regionally and globally what type of collections and all that. And as we go online, right, with more and more content online, such projects will be very important. Like the projects like currently be conducted by Kenneth Dean to map like Chinese temples, epigraphy, could well be applied to collections overseas. And if I have time, I can share a bit later on some databases that we were trying to build in the US, but I think now over time, right, due to manpower problems, they have not been really continued. And we actually had such a sort of initiative here, HuaiNet, right? Librarians from maybe like Mr. Lee and and Tim and Chimping would maybe know more about this. But I thought that was a very, very interesting platform. And when I was working in the Ohio universities in the Xiao Yupao Center, right, our databases were actually based on that. I mean, we were inspired very much by the HuaiNet platform, and it's rather sad to see that it has sort of like disappeared, right? At a time when actually it's even more important for such collaboration, such a platform for discussion. So that ties into my topic about collaboration. So hopefully there'll be more collaborations between research and libraries beyond NUS libraries, right? And we are also like currently working with like national libraries, IC's libraries at NTU History to get our students to work more on the materials, but also to help introduce like interesting collections to them, right? So maybe hopefully there are more collaborations between Singapore libraries and other libraries in other parts of the world, and also Southeast Asian consortiums. I think there used to be much more interaction, and I must say I'm not so familiar with the landscape here, and I wish, in a sense, I could know more about such collaborations if there are. So in terms of my own research experiences, right, of course, I drew a lot on the NUS libraries for my own research. The temple magazines collected by NUS libraries, old newspapers, the initiatives to digitize the Chinese newspapers in the NUS library collections have always been very helpful, along with Clan Association magazines. So many of these gray literature collections, which are actually very unique to NUS libraries, as together with later, as I'll mention, the Singapore Malaysia collection, right? These are very unique. And I think the collection of these materials was done not only through normal vendor channels, but through the sort of networks that the NUS libraries had created with different institutions in Singapore, with different scholars in Singapore. So that again highlights this importance, right? I'm also very interested in Chinese business history, right? So my research tapped a lot on the national NUS libraries, the Chinese libraries, the SMC libraries, and the old microfilms collections. I remembered I was looking for 3 books on Chinese remittances in 1940s Singapore. I approached one of the librarians. It was in the catalog, but it was not in, but they couldn't find it. And the very nice thing was that the librarian said, can you come back 3 days later? I think I can get it for you. I said, okay. So 3 days I came, she had the 3 books, but she borrowed it from a private collector. So you see, it shows the sort of networks that exist, right, between NUS libraries and the sort of collectors networks, the scholars networks. Later I found out that the collector was a gentleman whom I always see in the libraries, Mr. Ye Zhongling. Right. I had a guess it was him, but yeah. So that's why I feel that these style networks are very important. The National Archives of Singapore also used to collect a lot of materials on the Chinese in Singapore. Many of the Huiguan, minutes of meetings, many of the personal collections of entrepreneurs and all that, and of course their oral history archives and all that. So I drew a lot on that as well. And I visited Hong Kong University library collections, and the librarians there have been also very helpful in terms of the Yu Yan Zhang collection and other collections. As I went further, right, in my studies, I sort of branched out into Malay world history, right? NUS Libraries continued to be my go-to place for doing research, right? Yeah, I must admit, even today, right, when I do my library research, I start with the NUS catalog first. Yeah, so I shouldn't be saying that. I mean, nothing about NTU libraries, but I'm more used to the sort of looking at NUS libraries. But of course, I benefited from many other libraries for the Malay world history research, and it also broadened my perspective. Like working with Yati, Alan Reedy, and Alice Mark at University of Hawaii and Manoa Libraries really opened my eyes to how libraries and research were closely related. It cannot be separated, right? The way Yati and Alan engage with the faculty, with us, graduate students, with undergraduate students. I think that's something that I felt was very refreshing. I think in NUS libraries, you also do that, but again, I'm talking about some of the other libraries in Singapore, where they might not see interactions with graduate students as equally fulfilling, right? So Leiden University Libraries and Archives, again, and the British Library. I mean, these libraries, what I'm trying to say is not only the sort of like how many libraries I go to, but I mean, my debts to these libraries and to the librarians there, but how these libraries have stayed in my mind because of the way they engage users, researchers, and then the way they have evolved as institutions. When you go to the National Archives, the National Library in the Netherlands, in the British Library, you see, I mean, these national level institutions full of people doing research, full of people using the collections. Yes, not people who are studying for their O-level exams and all that, and are not like researchers complaining that there are no space to do their research, right? Yeah, so NUS libraries, the SMC collection and the Chinese library collection also helped me a lot, because their collections, right, go beyond the normal printed materials. They collected, like, even I was very pleasantly surprised to find anniversary volume of a Chinese school in the Natuna Islands, in the libraries in the Chinese library in NUS, right? So in my time when I was studying in UH, right, I began to have this dream of becoming a librarian also. So I started working part-time in a library, helping with the Philippines collection, and then Yati, and then also sitting in for Alan Reedy at the information reference desk, right? And then after that, so my first job was actually in a library, in the Yubao Shao Center, where it was a center for overseas Chinese overseas research, and where we tried to sort of engage, right, scholars and build databases. And it was also the time where I got to work closely with these scholars and then with other libraries in the field, right? And also working with Komosia and LC Jakarta, right? I was very impressed with like LC Jakarta, the people there, how they actually went down to show, even, take photos of what was being sold in newspaper stands, bookstores, to have a sense of what is there in the field. What are our vendors giving us and what are we missing, right? We also worked a lot with digitization projects, and then like I got the opportunity to work with to connect the Gongguan archive to the Komosia, like Southeast Asian Digital Library project, where they provide funds. And then Xiamen University, we tried to help them apply to the Endangered Archives program, although we didn't get the money, but I think they got to the second round of research, so it was quite nice. Coming home, right, I tried to, and that's why I felt it was very important to bring Jeremy and Esmond into the presentation. Is mainly to sort of see if we can achieve what I saw in the US, the type of engagement between research and librarians, the use of library collections by undergraduate students and helping to, So I tried to do that, and then I connected Leiden University Libraries with the NLB for the digitization of the Malay manuscripts in the former. I had a very nice chance of following Mr. Lee, Khan, and Chai Kim on their field surveys to Malaysia and Myanmar, where I think Jack was also with me in Penang, where we have a nice photo with the head president of the Koh Keng We. Well, Jack knows the story. And then connecting local institutions, groups, and individuals in the heritage scene with interesting collections, right, to libraries and heritage institutions here. So that's what I've been trying to do. Well, in terms of, and as a lead into Jeremy and Esmond's presentation, right, I would like maybe share some of my thoughts for the future. I think Jack is going to do the Cao Tu on me already. Greater, like, I'm really hoping for greater engagement between researchers and librarians on collection building, improving accessibility, improving engagement between undergraduate students and also maybe other levels and libraries collections in Singapore and also overseas. One of the key striking points when I was with one of the MOE committees for syllabus planning was that the teachers once said that we don't have materials for our classes. And I said, what about NLB? What about NUS Libraries? There's so much material, but why do they not know of these materials, right? So these are the questions that we maybe can think more about. And then more research on the history of collecting and collection development. Tim, Chin Peng, and Ming Guang were also, we were part of a research team that was applying for funds, although we did not get the funds to do the project, but I hope that in the future we can also work together to sort of do a history of collecting and maybe create a sort of institutional memory of how collecting has been done and sharing of experiences between the institutions on an open platform, right? Creating an open platform for discussing, planning, collaborating on collection development, and then hopefully more collaboration between Singapore libraries and international libraries and consortiums, not only in terms of digitizing existing collections, but in terms of talking about collecting, right? Sharing resources and all that. Thank you very much. Sorry, I went over time. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Keng We, for the fascinating presentation. Your presentation brings back many wonderful fond memories of our fieldwork to early to Penang a few years ago. And I very much look forward to our next trip to Malaysia. Can't wait for the pandemic to be over.
Yes.
Thanks, Keng We. And our second presenter is Jeremy Goh. Jeremy is a research associate in the Nanyang Center for Public Administration at NTU. His research interests include business and financial history, Chinese overseas, capitalism, and the modern history of Singapore and Southeast Asia. His presentation today is entitled Lim Peng Siang and Chinese Big Business in Singapore, 1904 to 1941. Over to you, Jeremy.
So thanks. Let me share my screen here. Okay. Okay, can you see my screen? Okay. So thanks so much, Jack, for the kind introduction and for chairing this seminar. So before I start my presentation, I would like to thank the NUS Library, especially Chai Kim and Rani for organizing this seminar and for the invite. Also, I would like to show my appreciation to Professor Koh, my mentor and thesis supervisor, as well as my friend Esmond, who is here with us today. Also, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the librarians as well as archivists who helped me in my research along the way. So including in the NLB and NAS, Xiao Ling, Fiona and Brennan, as well as in IC's library, Liang Shuanghu, guided me through the Wong Ah Fook collection. Okay, so for my sharing today, I will focus on 3 points. First, I will introduce Lim Peng Siang and key secondary works on him. Secondly, I would share some new insights from newspaper articles, mainly the Le Bao as well as the Zhonghui Bao or the Union Times, which I gained access through the NUS Chinese Library online database. It helped me a lot in my undergraduate and my master's research. So I would like to conclude by sharing the significance of these insights in the business and economic history of Singapore and Southeast Asia. Okay. So you can see on this slide the portrait of Lim Peng Siang. So he was actually born in 1872 in Longxi County in Zhangzhou, Fujian in China. And he arrived in Singapore during the 1880s and have received English education at St. Joseph's Institution. And with loans obtained from his father, Lim Ho Pua, he started his business career in 1904 and gradually set up several ventures in manufacturing, finance, and shipping located across maritime Asia. In July 1936, a reporter from the local newspaper, Sunday Tribune, interviewed Lim Peng Siang at his residence and described him as one of the greatest magnates and the founder of the famous Ho Hong Group in Singapore and Asia. Later in 1972, Dick Wilson, in his book on the Overseas Chinese Banking Corporation or OCBC, highlights that Lim was among the first to reclaim swampland for industry long before Minister Koh Keng We had his eyes on Jurong in the early 1960s. Yet, despite the significance of Lim Peng Siang in the economic and business history of Singapore and Southeast Asia, we see little research on him as compared to entrepreneurs such as Tan Kah Kee, Oh Boon Haw, and Wee Kiong Ham. So in his pioneering article on the Ho Hong enterprise published in 2004, Professor Yong Cheng Fat asked why the contribution of Lim have been underestimated and neglected in the literature. So using information obtained from business reports in the National Archives of Singapore, he provides an overview of Lim Peng Siang's manufacturing, banking, finance, and shipping interest in Singapore. So this particular article was published in Asian Culture, 亚洲文化, and can be found in this book as shown on this slide. I still remember accessing this book by chance in the NUS Chinese Library as an exchange student in 2015. And actually you can see the core number of this book here, it's still in the library. And it was this particular book and Professor Yong's article, as you can see here, which set me thinking about Lim Peng Siang as well as Chinese business and entrepreneurship. So 13 years after Professor Yong's article in 2007, Ng Giling, an alumni from NUS Chinese Studies, completed a wonderful honors thesis on Lim Peng Siang as part of a broader initiative funded by Professor Wong Sing Kiong from the Department of Chinese Studies and the Singapore Chinese Chamber of Commerce. So in this thesis, she provides a very comprehensive overview of Lim's philanthropic activities in not only Singapore, but also Malaya and China. And at the same time, we also see very big interest from the mainland China on early China-born businessmen, as well as their transnational business and social networks. In 2018, the Longhai's Literature and History Committee published a biography of Lim Peng Siang and his father, Lim Peng Siang, as you can see on this slide. And this book actually contains important details on lineage as well as their business interests in southern China. So I got access to this book as part of my fieldwork to Zhangzhou in 2018. So last but not least, this is my honors thesis on Lim Peng Siang, his transnational business career and activities done in 2018, built upon earlier works on Lim with new data from archives in Hong Kong and Zhangzhou, as well as newspapers, mainly the Le Bao and the Zhonghui Bao from the NUS Chinese Library, as well as my fieldwork in Zhangzhou. In this thesis, I tried to show how Lim's enterprises were integrated with each other and his broader vision of an industrial modernity through his integrated enterprises, as well as his social contributions in Singapore and southern China. Okay, so here on this slide, you can actually see an advertisement providing an overview of Lim Peng Siang's various businesses in 1919, so right after the First World War, and gives a very broad sense of how the enterprises of Lim were integrated. So I obtained this advertisement from a business journal called the International Trade Developer through Haiti Trust. So as you can see on this advertisement, the Ho Hong Bank, one of the three predecessors of the OCBC, this bank was actually kind of the foundation of his conglomerate right at the bottom of the advertisement. And this bank helped a lot in coordinating the finances of his business operations as well across Asia. And as you can see also, the Ho Hong Bank actually had branches located across key localities in Malaya, such as Penang, Malacca Strait Settlements, as well as Muar and Batu Pahat, and as well as the Dutch East Indies, so Palembang. And later during the 1920s, Lim Peng Siang set up branches of Ho Hong Bank in Hong Kong and Shanghai. So right above this bank is the Ho Hong Steamship Company. So this company supports not only the migration or human movement within Asia, but also the logistics or the transportation for his various manufacturing interests, as you can see here, such as cement, rice, and oil. So it's quite fascinating to see these secondary manufacturing industries in the early 20th century, 1910s, even before the 1960s or 70s. Another important detail is his trademark of Ho Hong, as you can see here on the slide, which comes with some features of Nanyang, so like the coconut tree and the elephant, together with a Latin translation of Ho Hong. Apologies, as I think I can't pronounce this motto perfectly, but it translates to harmony and abundance, which is, you can see the translation of Ho Hong. To me, this motto or this trademark reflects not only his desire for prosperity, but also his broader vision of reaching out to non-Chinese consumer markets across Asia. Okay, so I will move on to some newspaper articles from the Le Bao and the Zhonghui Bao that are very interesting, just a couple of them. So first, I would like to show this job advertisement for the Chinese Commercial Bank back in 1920. So the Chinese Commercial Bank was the first Hokkien bank in Singapore, formed after the predominantly Guang Ik Bank in 1903 and the Teochew Si Hai Tong Bank in 1907. So Lim Peng Siang was one of the founders, amongst others, of the Chinese Commercial Bank, and he served as the first managing director. So I think he contributed around 5% of the capital for this bank, around 100,000 Straits dollars. So I think this advertisement offers us a broad sense of how banks hire professionals during this period, and also a sense of how much like the key staff earn in these banks. So we can see from this article, the manager earns around like 300 straight dollars per month, and plus bonus, which I think is really quite a bit of money considering this period. And interestingly, the general manager of the Chinese commercial bank is required to have a collateral of or security of 30,000 straight dollars. So I think this was probably to ensure some credibility on the part of the candidate, and also possibly to make sure that the candidate could pay back loans used for business, his own business interests, if there were any. And then the second post mentioned in this article, the director and assistant general manager would earn a monthly wage of 250 straight dollars per month along with bonus. And very interestingly, for this post, the bank requires the candidate to be bilingual in both English and Chinese. And we know how this fluency in English and Chinese were quite rare during the early colonial period. So I think this bilingual skill was necessary in order to enable the bank to communicate effectively with the colonial government, and also to adhere to any company regulations set by the British colonial government of the day. And I think it mentions at the end of this ad for like interested parties to contact the managing director of Ho Hong company, which we know was Lim Peng Siang, and it is very likely that he was the only interviewer for both of these posts in the Chinese commercial bank. So this suggests how hiring was very personalized during this period, even as the Chinese banks during this period were adopting like modern structures and strategies. Yeah. So this ad shows some key information about the Chinese commercial bank later in 1913, and very importantly, these advertisements allows us to know who got the job eventually. So we see here the Xiao Yingting got the job as a manager and director of the Chinese commercial bank. So from what we know, Xiao Yingting was a prominent landowner in Singapore and Johor. And very interestingly, Xiao Yingting was born in Dongxi County in Zhangzhou, exactly the same background as Lim Peng Siang. So we see some like overlaps here, and how personalized the hiring was, and the emphasis on geographical based networks. The other important person here was Xiao Poling, who got the job of assistant manager and secretary. So we know that Xiao Poling was a straight Chinese, and he was educated at the Anglo-Chinese school, so effectively bilingual. And he was later member of the Legislative Council during the 1930s. So I still remember a case that when the Chinese commercial bank experienced a bank run during the onset of the First World War due to some panic in August or September 1914. So Xiao Poling had to go to visit the governor, I think Sir Arthur Young, together with Lim Peng Siang, as well as Dr. Lim Boon King, another director on the Chinese commercial bank. And they managed to gain liquidity support from the Swiss government, which helped them overcome the crisis. So I think there was this oral history interview record from Tan Yi Leong in the National Archives of Singapore, which when Tan Yi Leong recalled how Xiao Poling had to work overnight, over one night or 2 nights without any sleep, to prepare and finalize the financial records of the Chinese commercial bank for them to present to the governor, and obtain support successfully. And Xiao Poling was later the general manager of the Ho Hong Bank. Okay, so from the cases of the Chinese commercial bank and the Ho Hong Bank, we often assume that early Chinese colonial banks they were often separated by dialect. So you have the Cantonese Koh Keng We Bank, you have the Teochew Sihai Tong Bank, and the Hokkien Chinese Commercial Bank and the Ho Hong Bank. But I think this article shows that this was not completely true, as we see this particular article shows the articles of association of the insurance company called the Eastern United Assurance Company, the 联东保险有限公司. So this was an insurance company formed in 1913 by Lim Peng Siang together with several of his contemporaries, around 130 of them. And in this memorandum of association in the Le Bao, it contains several important information about the formation of this company, as well as the functions and key founders. So from this article, we know that investors of this bank, of this company, came from various Chinese dialect groups. They include the Teochew Liao Zhengxing, who was the vice president of the Singapore Chinese Chamber of Commerce during that time, as well as the Cantonese Wong Afu, shown here as Huang Fu Tian. Right? And this insurance company also had institutional investors, including the Sihai Tong Bank and the Koh Keng Bank, as well as investors from various places in Asia, including the Federated Malay States, Java and Burma. So these transnational linkages were actually quite strong here. And the formation of this inter-dialect insurance company very strongly indicates the desire of the Chinese enterprises of the day to have their own insurance provider instead of depending on Western ones, and in doing so remain competitive. And it is clear that they were not hesitant to go beyond dialect boundaries to do so. Okay. So we see the Chinese from various dialect groups coming together, not only in finance, but also the steamship industry. So I think this is relatively less well known. And Le Bao contains one report on this, on Lim Peng Siang's proposal to form so-called the Eastern United Steamship Company Limited, the 联东轮船有限公司. And through doing so, Lim wanted to reduce competition between Chinese steamship companies. And this particular article details initial plans to incorporate this steamship company in Singapore with an investment of $2 million. And this proposal received support from members of the Singapore Chinese Chamber of Commerce across dialect groups. And so through this proposal, Lim intended to bring together the shipping interests of different Chinese dialect groups to better compete with rival companies owned by what they called as the outsiders or the 外人, based on scale. However, very unfortunately, there is currently no further evidence on the development of this proposal, and I think it is possible that the ensuing First World War disrupted plans to incorporate this company. So the coming together of various Chinese dialect groups in business and finance, as we see earlier, was not without tension and complexities. And we could get a sense of these tensions from the case of liquidation of the Koh Keng Bank in 1913, which was very widely reported in the Le Bao and the Zhonghui Bao, as well as the English newspapers, Straits Times, Singapore Free Press, Malaya Tribune. And as president of the Singapore Chinese Chamber of Commerce, Lim Peng Siang was a liquidator of this failed Koh Keng Bank in 1913, along with his vice president, the Teochew Liao Chiao-heng, as I mentioned earlier. So newspaper reports on the negotiations between various Chinese creditors of this bank highlight the intersection of class and ethnicity concerns among them. On one hand, we see creditors from various dialect groups claiming around $2 million worth of debt, supporting the leadership of Lim Peng Siang and Liao Chiao-heng. They recognized the reputation and expertise of the chamber leadership and the fact that they were not Cantonese, which might have helped them in obtaining the support from most of the bank's non-Cantonese Chinese creditors. Yet, on the other hand, creditors from the Cantonese group with around $400,000 worth of debt opposed the chamber's leadership, citing the lack of Cantonese leadership. They were concerned not only with dialect, but also possible collusion between big businesses, as they feared that Lim Peng Siang and Liao Chiao-heng, as owners of big business, might be biased towards the directors of the Koh Keng We Bank, who were former directors of the Singapore Chinese Chamber of Commerce. So from this example, we can see some tensions arising both from ethnicity or dialect as well as class, mainly between big businesses and small businesses, as businessmen from different dialect groups came together during the 1910s. Okay. So basically, in sum, I discussed a few instances where Lim Peng Siang and his contemporaries from various dialect groups attempted to band together to form new banking, finance, and steamship companies together. And through a greater skill and a greater financial strength, they aspired to better compete with Western enterprise in the competitive business environment during the early 20th century, particularly the 1910s in the articles that I covered. And this was actually around 2 decades before the formation of OCBC through the merger of the 3 Hokkien banks. So these few cases illustrate the value of newspapers in allowing us to rethink the historiography of Chinese business and colonial economy, not only in Singapore and Malaya, but also in Southeast Asia broadly. First, we see the colonial Chinese businesses thinking beyond dialect and ethnicity and how they tried to amalgamate modern and traditional business structures to suit their needs. And second, Lim Peng Siang's businesses relate closely to industrialization and modernization in Singapore. So currently, most studies of industrialization and modernization have focused on the post-1960 period, as well as the role of the new Singapore nation state, multinational corporations, and government-linked companies. And I think Lim Peng Siang's business career with his interconnected interest in manufacturing, shipping, banking, and finance suggests that similar processes and engagements were already underway before the Second World War. So perhaps we should pay closer attention to the business careers of Lim and his contemporaries, which may help us to probe the presence and significance of early industrialization in Singapore. So in this endeavor, access to what I call essential primary sources, including the Chinese newspapers held by the NUS Chinese Library, will greatly facilitate and encourage research on these areas. Okay, so I think with this, I would like to end my presentation. Thanks a lot and looking forward to questions, comments in the later discussion. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Jeremy, and thanks so much for keeping the time.
Oh.
Our third and final speaker is Esmond Soh. Esmond is a master's candidate in history at NTU. His research interests include the history of religion and the history of the overseas Chinese communities in Southeast Asia. His presentation is entitled Students Seeking Sources: My Experience and Encounter with NUS Libraries. The floor is yours, Esmond.
Okay. Thanks, Jack, for that introduction. So let me share my screen. Yeah. So morning, everyone. This will be my presentation for today. Hello. Yeah. So my approach is actually a little bit more different from the other two previous speakers. Maybe it's a little bit more of a reflective, self-ethnographic tint to what I'm doing and how I got to know NUS Library and their collections. So as Prof. Chia had introduced my title, I like alliteration, students, myself, seeking sources from NUS and other libraries around. So my presentation is a bit different from the rest from Prof. Koh's and Jeremy's, because for somebody who had to submit his master's thesis during COVID, I guess NUS Library has been very helpful in helping me scaffold my research in this regard. So let me get into my discussion today, which is a little bit more narrative and a little bit more personal. Although I go into the professional dynamics of elements of change and my adaptation to this COVID reality that we are now. So for part one, it's one person's account as to how I was exposed to different sources in NUS Library beyond the reach from NTU. That's essentially what is happening in part one and the libraries that I came into contact with. Part two, I will talk a little bit about how I benefited from the interlibrary loan and the document delivery system from NUS and across the board as well. And part three, I'll share a little bit about how open access sources provided by NUS libraries have been helpful in my research over time. So I'll go into my first encounter with NUS libraries. Chronology does not break into sections as neatly as they are presented in this section, but I just want to single out a few critical moments where I've been exposed to such sources as an undergraduate. And yeah, so when I was doing my undergraduate, I had to take a course in world environmental history. And one of the group projects that I had to do for 4006 was actually on the history of the Yunnan Gardens in NTU, which is the place, not the restaurant that I'm talking about. So at that particular point in time, I went to trawl for sources regarding that particular location in NTU. And I was quite surprised to find that there were actually very few sources available in Wangkumu Library from in NTU currently. So it got me very curious as to how despite the history of Nanyang University, we actually see very few sources in NTU. And it was much later on when this particular module had ended, and I went to trawl a little bit further into the bibliographic history of Nanyang University's history, when I discovered that actually most of the holdings from Nanyang University were merged with NUS Libraries collection. So in terms of the interlibrary connections and histories, we can already see that some intertwining since the 1970s till today. And yeah, that was what I discovered from one of the bibliographies on the history of Nanyang University by Prof. Liu Hong. And when I went to look through the catalogs a bit more of NUS, also interesting. So many of these sources are actually from the old Nanyang University. So this particular one is on the exchange programs for Nanyang University. And that was when I started to become more curious about what the collections of NUS were as an undergrad, my second year, it seems. So the next turning point came one semester later, 6 months or so, where I had to take this module on science tech and medicine in East Asia. It's a compulsory module, and we were assigned this iSearch paper by Prof. Lisa Onaga, who's currently with Max Planck Institute in Germany. So we were supposed to write this paper from a writer's unit experience. We need to write it in terms of how we actually look at sources. And typically in academic writing, we're supposed to write in this omniscient, semi-godlike voice in the background with little reference to the limitations and problems we face in assessing our sources. But what Prof. Onaga did for us was that she insisted we talk about sources that we could not access. And in terms of the time frames of I think we had around 3 months to present this iSearch paper. What are the limitations of assessing these sources? And I encourage to tell a story when we write. So this particular assignment, it got me thinking about what other sources went beyond my area of research and within my comfort zone of NTU One Search and NLB One Search. So to cut this extremely long and interesting assignment short, she pushed us to look at sources from beyond NTU and NLB libraries and sources that were from without these organizations. What could we actually, what did we actually miss during our data mining and during our search? So that was when I started to tinker very seriously with libraries and access to primary sources. And yeah, this was actually an email that I sent to an international organization who apparently had some data on how pandas were cared for. My final iSearch paper topic was on the cultural history of the panda in late imperial China and hopefully Southeast Asia, but they didn't get back to me in the end. But it was an important experience, I guess, because it was only after this assignment then I started to realize that the cross-cutting nature of libraries, archives, and the sources, they are actually more fluid than I had expected as an undergrad. Yeah, we expect everything to be packaged nicely within NTU Libraries One Search, but I didn't, yeah, my impressions of such an ideal changed after this assignment. So that brings me to the second part of my discussion, which actually takes me back to around 2 years ago when I started my master's program at NTU in the history department. So just a bit of a technical discussion as to how I use these two terms in this discussion. Interlibrary loan provides access to items that are not owned by NTU library per se, like books or articles from other libraries. Document delivery system or DDS, convenience copies in terms of articles or specific book chapters that are owned and licensed by other libraries. So in short, I'm using them somewhat interchangeably in this presentation. Although for a DDS, you get to keep the e-copy or hard copy for yourself. That tends to be the incentive and the attraction for doing a document delivery rather than ILL. But for the ILL, you can have the whole book or the whole journal or whole whatever that holds whatever you are looking for. Yeah, so DDS in short is just for convenience sake. And my thesis topic in my master's program was actually on the Zheng Kong Jiao. It's one of the newer religious movements among the overseas Chinese and in late imperial China. And they're translated into English as the religion of the void or literally true emptiness teachings. And that was, the designation of such movements have still been up for debate. Scholars have been using terms like redemptive societies by Prasanjit Dwara, and more recently, sectarian religions by Nicholas Broy. So in short, they rose to fame and popularity in the Nanyang because of their opium curing regimens and exercises and tea drinking rituals. So in short, prayed over tea was offered to visitors and worshippers who sought a cure for their own ailments or opium addictions. So with my topic in mind, broadly speaking, from left to right of this slide itself, I'm actually looking at very specific topics to very general, broad topics as a whole. So I have very issue-specific concerns, for example, opium rehabilitation programs from both a biomedical and spiritual standpoint, and regional-specific interactions like Southeast and East Asian interactions, where I'm interested in societies, ideas, intellectual transformations and identities, and cross-border changes. And yeah, most broadly of all, thematically speaking, I guess I'm overlapping a lot with Prof. Chia's research on Chinese religion, people moving around, intellectual histories, rites and rituals, social-cultural change. And just this is an example as to how important libraries are to my research, because two of the most important the two earliest researchers to work on the Zheng Kong Jiao among the overseas Chinese was Xu Yinqiao in 1954, where he published an article detailing into the Zheng Kong Jiao's beliefs, scriptures, and sources of inspiration in the Journal of the Southeast Societies, the Nanyang Xuebao. And 8 years later, slightly less than a decade, Luo Xiangling continued with his monograph on the centenary of the Zheng Kong Jiao's founding in 1962. And to get access to two of these very important sources, I needed to go to two libraries in Singapore, and none of them were actually with NTU. So for the Journal of the Southeast Society, National Library Board, they were actually fortunate to have this archive in their collection. In the city area, that is where we found my first source. The second is Luo Xiangling's classical monograph, which has a bibliography of very important works that I had to consult. So it was fortunate that NUS Libraries had such one copy archived with them. And the second time, I actually went to visit NUS Libraries twice in my research. So the first time was as an undergrad, where I was spent most of my time orienting myself to the scale of the Central Library. Many basements and secret places to look for books in the Chinese collection. And the second time was to procure a thesis that was written by a student in the Chinese department from NUS. So in terms of books access, not every library in the world has, no library in the world has everything and every book. So I was also very fortunate that during this age of COVID, that I had this, I have all these open access bibliographies written and published online by various scholars in the field. So Prof. Philip Clark was very kind to open bibliography on this, on Chinese religion. Oxford bibliographies actually has no real entry on late imperial Chinese religion. The closest is early China by Prof. Pu Mu Zhou. And this is another one of such bibliography that I had consulted for my scaffolding and foundational reading by Prof. Baron Teha. So specific publications to be sought out, I got them through many ILLs from NUS. And the good thing about these online catalogs is that we see new initiatives like WorldCat, and it really gets you to guesstimate like which libraries are the best to get all these materials, secondary sources I require for my literature review. And the best thing about WorldCat is that it's free and you get to toggle it based on your location. So I just set to NTU library typically. And this is one of the key interlibrary loans I received from NUS Libraries. I had many other interlibrary loans, but there's a very funny story behind this particular interlibrary loan. So I borrowed this book for the book chapter on Anna Seidel on imperial treasures and Taoist sacraments. So she talked about seals and swords and in Taoist beliefs and rituals, and how we scaffolded their belief systems in early China. And after I returned the book, 3 months later, I spoke to a friend who was working on Tantric Buddhism, the first part of this book title. And he told me that he was going to NTU to look for an ILL. I said, oh, which ILL is it? Then he said, oh, it is the one by Michelle Strickman. Oh, is it the one whose book cover is like the brown paper used to wrap the Chinese stuff? Oh, yeah. So we found it quite funny that two people working on two separate topics, Tantric Buddhism and I guess Chinese religion, borrowed the same book, and it was conveyed to us via two separate occasions from NUS Libraries. So that was one such funny occasion. And other books that are classics in the study of these new religious movements, like this book by Susan Nakin, uses eyewitnesses reports, ideas about official reports as well. So it also gives you an insight into how these sources are used to compile these histories per se. And NUS Library, again, I'm also very fortunate to receive this fairly old book from them, 1981. And yeah, this was my come and collect your book email from NTU Library to me. And not only from the English side, the Chinese side, I'm also very grateful to NUS Library for their collections. So this was actually one of the best books that I read for my to prepare for my literature review in my dissertation. It focuses much more on local village life and its complex interactions with folk religions from the perspective of Qing Dynasty officials and day-to-day living in late imperial China in general. So ideas of collusion and social life, this was a very good book written by Liang Jingzhi. And yeah, this was the come and collect your book email from NTU Libraries. So more recently, I guess issues of mobility, migration, and modernization have become more pushed to the forefront of the field of Chinese religion among late imperial Chinese communities and Southeast Asian exchanges. So it wasn't so much of a big thing in the 70s, but it started to become a devoted topic of itself in the historiography of migration and intellectual change in the 1990s onwards. So Prof. Chia, his recently released book, South China Sea Buddhism, is testimony to the emergence of this growing field of historiography that is relevant to my area of research. And not only Prof. Chia's front, also very fortunate that Prof. Kenneth Dean from Chinese Studies in the NUS needs no introduction, but his research on Chinese popular religion, Taoist studies, popular culture, Chinese literature, and most importantly, Chinese religious networks. I'm so fortunate that NUS Library has all this material that's been archived with them. So in terms of the interlibrary loans and the document delivery system, the second one that you see on this slide was actually a book chapter from one of the compiled edited volumes that NUS Library have been able to scan and bring over to to NTU via the document delivery system. So I guess that's the benefit of being in Singapore. You have many prominent scholars in the field, and you can just get the document delivery system from NUS Libraries. And in many ways, I guess the Zheng Kong Jiao's history parallels with that of a similarly organized religious movement, the Xian Tian Da Dao, the Great Way of Former Heaven. So Dr. Shou Yingruo is currently working with ARI in NUS, and yeah, her works have been very influential and helpful in my scaffolding of my own research. So some of the interesting dynamics and the cross movement influences I actually observed in the Zheng Kong Jiao and the Xian Tian Jiao, and it helps that in her research that whatever sources that she had used, this was from her recent article, whatever secondary sources that she had used, I'm actually banking on the fact that NUS Library has a copy of them. So I actually got this email from NTU Library fairly recently about come and collect this book that we have borrowed from NUS on your behalf. So yeah, I guess it is not only the inter-institutional networks that matter. It's also a little bit on the interpersonal exchanges. So Yingruo had been very kind. She loaned me her personal copy of this book, which I used for my literature review. And yeah, it's still in my home. So thanks very much if you are happening to in this presentation. So I guess the personal loans from personal libraries also matter as well. From my own part, I've also loaned out books like Chan Wing-Sit's book on the source book of Chinese philosophy. In the past, it was required buying for anybody who was doing Chinese religion because you needed to cite primary sources like the Analects of Confucius or the Tao Te Ching. And his book was actually one of the best, although it was a brick. But nowadays, with open access collections, I actually loaned that book out for somebody who wanted to read the commentary of Prof. Chan, who's and we have open access collections like C-Text Project, which has actually benefited me greatly. So now everybody just uses the Control F, the search function, to find exactly what they want from whichever citation they're looking for. And yeah, such open access projects have been very helpful. And speaking of open access projects, I would like to discuss how I've used the digital gems from NUS Libraries Southeast Asian collections to help my research in this regard. So as a case study, I guess the open access Chinese newspapers from NUS Libraries were actually, well, they were really a godsend in this age of COVID. I really get to look through everything in high quality and you get to magnify and expand them to whatever you want to talk about. So just to recap, a few slides earlier, I talked about opium rehabilitation programs. And I was actually very interested in how this idea of opium rehabilitation was actually quite consistent with late 1800s and early 1900s. This particular idea that you could actually consume drugs in a very broad sense to help fight this urge to smoke opium. And it was quite consistent with the ideals of the time. Theoretically, this advertisement works on the idea of a nicotine patch. You drink liquid medicine and you take pills that were produced by this company to suppress your urge for consuming opium. This was published in the Zhengnan Rebao. I think it was the first edition of it, April 1st, 1913. So the key point to be made is that as far as people thought about opium causing harm to the nation and the people in late imperial Republican China, they still required some form of pharmaceutical suppressant. Yeah, they needed some gateway to prove that they had this solution, and they came out with all forms of medicine. So what really interested me was that when I did comparative research, I looked into late imperial Republican Chinese newspapers. Oh, this is another fantastic open access collection on Republican Chinese newspapers. I think recently it was used also by Vincent Gusera and Paul Katz in their research on Republican Chinese religion. So these ideas were what interested me, was how they cut across boundaries, and ideas about how how to suppress that urge to consume opium in this age manifested in many different forms. So this is one such advertisement on hypnotism, and I'm 催眠术 in this article I've translated hypnotism, although I'm not too sure whether it has a different translation in that particular point in history. So the ideas about how people are using different forms of biomedical solutions to, it just cuts across ideas of spiritual, religious, and cultural discourse, and it was consistent in late imperial Republican China as well. So this particular advertisement is also quite interesting because we see terms like 宗教, which was also a fairly modern invention in Chinese, as there's actually no comparable term to religion until the late 1800s onwards, was translated into China via Japan. And not only hypnotism, we also see similar claims where holy water offered by shantangs, xiangtengs. I'm not too sure whether these are the xiangtengs we have in mind in Singapore. We see the Blue Cross, but they also have this claim that if you drink our holy water, you won't be tempted to smoke opium. So very similar claims to the Zheng Kong Jiao. And I'm interested in recreating this intellectual, social, religious, cultural milieu consistent with the time with all these open access resources. And they cut across regions as well. You have this Southeast Asian example, and you have two East Asian counterparts of it. And on a personal part, I'll be honest, my Wen is not very good, and I'm actually very thankful that there's a lot of these open access resources by NUS, and I actually keep this book in my office when I was doing my master's. I will look at one institution every day and try to translate whatever stele and epigraphy there is in the book, and then try to match it with the English translations by Prof. Dean and Dr. Xu Yuanhai. So I guess the practical aspect and the beneficial element of NUS Libraries is that it's not only helpful in research, but in terms of my practical training in reading Chinese as well. So in the past, I've used liukeng.sg, but now thanks to this more recent project, the Singapore Historical GIS website, I also got to see many old institutions, how they relocated over time. I guess Singapore's case relocation is a part and parcel of life because redevelopment is occurring so often. And for my own research on where Zheng Kong Jiao temples are located in 1920s, 1910 Singapore, I'm also very grateful to the Geography Department of NUS and NUS Libraries for hosting this many layered and chronological layering of maps, which is also accessible to the public that I've used throughout my research. And I guess another underappreciated resource is the Ming Shi Lu that's open access, and it was translated, the Southeast Asian sections especially was translated by Prof. Geoff Wade, and it was actually a perfect counterpart to reading this book by Timothy Brook. So it was a helpful guide because if anything, Tim Brook actually referred to quite a bit of the Ming Shi Lu, and personally I'm interested in elements of crime and this inter-Asian exchanges. So South China Sea, piracy, and smuggling, they actually featured in these primary sources that were made freely accessible by NUS Libraries. So this is one case is currently hosted by NUS Libraries, the Ming Shi Lu, with English translations. And yeah, it was a fantastic reading aid to all the references that were made by Timothy Brook in his monograph. And the complete collection of what NUS has is also available on CTEX. So I guess it's also beneficial. You get to do some cross comparison and looking at the text in context as well. And all these are all open access projects. So maybe one single slide on looking forward. I guess as the most junior speaker in this presentation today, maybe I'll talk a little bit about how colloquially the term is passing the lamp, 传灯. So for my juniors part, I actually did recommend them to look at the bare minimum through NUS catalogs and their libraries, not only in the main NUS library collection, but ICs as well. So this is a database of open access sources I prepared for them during the 7 lunar month for 2019, because it's an age of COVID and there's no exchange for them. So this is just for them. And like what Prof. Koh said, a little bit of a collaborative research, trying to consolidate whatever is available open access and try to draw out the mappings and the networks that connect each compiler with one another. So with that, I end my presentation for today. the last slide, to paraphrase the Seng Gong Jiao, is to 报恩, to really to repay gratitude to everyone who has helped make this seminar possible today. First of all, really thank you very much to NUS Libraries for the invitation for the three of us to have this discussion today. Ms. Chow and Madam Rani from NUS Libraries for facilitating the admin and practical side. Prof. Chia, thanks for moderating. And yeah, all the librarians and all the keepers of these open access materials. I thank you all from the bottom of my heart and my juniors' hearts. Hopefully they are using whatever is open access and freely available to them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Esmond, for your fascinating presentation. It's great to hear so many familiar names and sources in your talk. All right, so we have about 30 minutes for Q&A. I see that we have some questions in the chat box. So what I will do is that I will read out the questions and I will invite our speakers to respond to the questions. I will begin with two questions for Jeremy. Shirin has a question. Does the fluency in Chinese in the Ho Hong ads refer to Mandarin or Hokkien? Thank you. And Samuel also has a question for you. How the early banking is formed to be recognized in one unity. Over to you, Jeremy.
Okay, thanks, Jack, as well as the question. So to answer the first question, yes, the ad refers to fluency to Mandarin, not Hokkien. So it's in the ad is called 精通中英语言 and 文字. So it's a fluency in English and Mandarin in terms of speaking, as well as the in terms of the wordings or words. I can't properly translate. Okay, so I think for the second question, I can't really get it. So so it's asking from Samuel how the early banking
is formed to be recognized as one unity. Was there perhaps like a merger? Or Samuel, are you here? Would you like to unmute yourself to clarify your question?
Yes. Actually, I looking at the just now the speaker actually mentioned about the how the finance sector, how they work together, and I just want to know how long it take to establish the uniformity on sort of that means the Singapore banking, how they really form out, to cooperate with the maybe mainland China or any worldwide on the finance sector lah. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, I think I get. Thanks for your questions, Samuel. Yeah, I think that's a very great and also a very big and important question. So you're asking like the linkages and the cooperation between banking in Singapore, as well as like any ties overseas in mainland China. I think this process is currently ongoing, particularly with the ongoing the Belt and Road Initiative and the cooperation in terms of new technologies in banking and finance, for the digital banking, and so on. Perhaps even like cryptocurrencies, with several new inventions coming out, and several agreements signed between Singapore and as well as mainland China on several levels. But the big question is that we do not know exactly like when this process started. I think Professor Koh would agree with me. So, but from what we know is that the first Chinese modern bank formed in Singapore and Malaya was in 1903 through the formation of the Koh Keng We, predominantly Chinese, and it is kind of modern because we know that it is registered with the colonial government and it has limited liability. Yeah. So I think maybe if Professor Koh can add to my answer, I think he's in a better position to answer it.
Yeah, can we?
Sorry, I think sorry. Well, I think Jeremy is in a better position, but anyway, just maybe give my thoughts. I think the in terms of collaboration overseas, I think one way was, of course, they form branches. These banks also form branches overseas, and I think in Jeremy's research, the Ho Hong Bank also formed branches overseas, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so I think that might have been one way of collaboration. But in terms of like mergers or coming together to form a new bank, I think probably more research needs to be done on that. But it's a very good question. And it's a very important theme and topic to sort of further inquire into, I think. So thank you, Samuel, for the question as well.
Great. Thank you. And we have a question from Clarence. Thank you to all speakers for taking the time to educate us. I'm an undergraduate who wrote a literature review on the transformation of Chinese enterprises in Southeast Asia between 1830 to 1930 in Dr. Sing Guoquan's module on Chinese migration. Dr. Koh's literature review on Chinese business helped me greatly for my assignment. I wanted to ask, given that written sources are largely by the economic elites, also known as the Taogeis, the revenue farmers, what are the good primary sources or databases to visit if you want to study the lives of Chinese migrant laborers or coolies who were largely illiterate?
Any one of us.
Okay.
So maybe I just go, and then maybe Jeremy and Esmond, if you want to add, you can. Yeah, thank you, Clarence. I'm glad that essay was of some use. But the written sources are largely left by the economic elites. But of course, the economic elites did not leave that many sources as well. So it's a challenge that I think many business historians in Asia, especially including Singapore, have to work with. Although I think we have, it's not that they don't exist, there are some sources, some important sources. But if you're talking about the lives of Chinese migrant labor coolies, you have to probably look at, I mean, you won't be you'll be having to look at maybe various government reports, oral histories. The oral history archives in the National Archives would be very interesting body of material to tap on. Government reports, like I think the labor departments or even the colonial period, if you go earlier into the 19th century, maybe you'll be within the colonial office archives and all that. It's not like, so from time to time you have reports on labor, but you'll probably find more in between. I think newspapers were also very important, because sometimes newspapers report on these issues. And of course, if you read James Warren's work on the rickshaw coolies, prostitution, Aku and Karakisan, you'll find that the coroner reports are also very interesting sources. But each of these sources, of course, are written with a particular perspective, purpose. So it will be like your work to sort of tease out the necessary details and then read them across the grain, along the grain, in different ways, and yeah, to make sense of these materials. Maybe Jeremy and Esmond got some things to add.
Okay, so I think besides like what are the numerous primary sources which Professor Koh mentioned, I think another important source is actually the you might want to consider, Clarence, perhaps is remittance letters, or the known as Qiaopi. So perhaps I would recommend you to look at one book written by Professor Gregory Benton, as well as my current boss, Professor Liu Hong. It's entitled Dear China. So actually, I think it contains some analysis on these immigrant letters and remittances. So perhaps will help you in your research to find the voice of migrant workers and coolies. So they might be largely illiterate, but at least they approach like letter writers to help them write their thoughts and to send them to their ancestral hometown. So probably just take a look at this book, and maybe you can find some new insights as well as some primary sources to look at. The book also includes, I think, some samples of these remittance methods. I think will be of great interest to you. Thanks.
Yeah. And to add on to Jeremy, the in terms of primary sources, in addition to what Prof. Liu Hong and Gregory Benton have written, you have like publications of these original materials in the National Library, and I think NUS Library and NTU libraries as well. Like the Chaoshan Qiao Pi, and then the Minnan Qiao Pi also. And then you have the Thai, the collections of the Thai scholar and collector, I think, that you can also find. So these are possible if you are interested in going beyond the second, what Jeremy recommended, like looking at the original materials. And then NUS Library, National Libraries also have some collections of these letters, right? So they're very scattered. And that's the nice, I think the sometimes the nice thing about working with these materials, although it takes more time scattered, but it's a nice experience, adventure. Maybe Esmond.
Actually, most of the points have been covered by Prof. Koh and Jeremy, but maybe just of an interesting note is that for the Chinese newspapers that are digitized by NUS Libraries, their digital gems, it seems like there's a lot of crime in Singapore. So yeah, maybe newspapers needed to sell themselves in the 1910s, 1920s. So almost every single page of advertisements is punctuated by crimes like this XXX stole this goose. So I guess the real question is not so much about the sources themselves, but it's about reading between the lines. And yeah, what Robert Anthony did was essentially looking at official records. But official records, sources, and archives, they are all compiled with a purpose. And it is the historian's job to tease out these nuances in terms of how they are framed and how they're structured. So as far as some people claim that the archive is an organic extension and the organic mirror of reality, it's not true, because things like opium addictions, they tend to be featured more prominently, cast light on a particular social economic group, etc., etc. Yeah.
Hey, thanks, Esmond. Moving on, we have a question from Tan Lim Peng to Jeremy. How did the Chinese bank in early 20th century compare to the foreign banks, such as Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank and or Citibank in terms of business segments and market shares?
Thanks for the question, Mr. Tan. So I think for these questions, I have 3 points. So first, I think the Chinese banks and the international bank or foreign banks such as Citibank, they differed in terms of scale. So international banks were actually much bigger and in terms of structure and also coverage of a geographical region, and they are much more better capitalized than Chinese banks that are formed locally in either in Singapore or Malaya. And second, importantly, in terms of the clientele, because with their better capitalization, the foreign banks actually they reach out to a broader audience, the Western businesses across continents. But one big unique point was that these international banks in colonial Singapore and Malaya, they only service big accounts, so mainly like rich businessmen, rich individuals, rich Western businesses. And because of this, many individuals like workers, coolies, they could not meet the minimum deposit required by the by these international banks. So perhaps a Japanese, Dutch, American, British banks. So there's a gap here. But despite their strength in terms of finance and networks, these international banks still faced like limitations in reaching out to the indigenous population or the Chinese communities, because they had to reach out to convertors, the Maipan or the local Chinese businessmen with the networks to link like those Chinese customers with the international banks. Yeah, and I think my final point is regarding like the backing from the state. So one very big advantage that the international banks had was that they had support from the state in which their headquarters lie. So for instance, you see the Dutch banks having support from Holland, and then the British banks from London Stock Exchange, and they have support from the governments, colonial metropolitan governments, as what we call them as the lender of last resort. So they will be able to provide any liquidity or funding if the banks required it, so to prevent or minimize any financial contagion during the colonial period. Yet we see, as compared to these international banks, the Chinese banks or other indigenous banks in like the Strait settlements or Malaya, they do not have this privilege of having state support. It is not guaranteed. So we see here, for instance, the failure of the Koh Keng Bank. It failed and collapsed because it failed. It did not get any aid from the colonial government of the day. But yet, we know that a Chinese commercial bank managed to get it, but it's not for granted, and they had to request it. Yeah.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Thanks.
And we have a question from Jeanette. Thank you for this very helpful overview of historical and library resources. Have you come across sources on the impact of Singapore government's aggressive compulsory land acquisition exercise from 1959 to 1980s on the different Chinese communities? In particular, the impact of it on the lives of individuals and families. There are many records claiming benefits with view HDB flats, but few discussing its negative impact.
I guess for, if you're really looking at individuals and families, I think National Archives, there'll be some of it, but most likely you have to do some field work. And maybe in terms of secondary sources, perhaps could consider the Journal of Chinese Overseas. 2012, I think it was Tay Yun Shui or something who written something on social settlements in Singapore. And what he or she did was that he or she consolidated a lot of oral history records and performed some field work. I guess I could type the title in the chat. Yeah. So it's accessible via Braille online.
Yeah. Yeah, I think in addition, so the oral history archives, like Esmond said, will be a very important resource, and probably you have to do interviews. Of course, the HDB and SIT have their archives, which is at the National Archives, but you probably got to get access first. So it is possible to ask for access. Yeah, to look at the impact on the lives of individuals and families. Yeah.
Moving on, we have a question from Corinne Chan. Hi everyone, I'm a third-year undergraduate student at Yale NUS College who has done research on Chinese newspapers and wartime collaboration with the Japanese. First of all, I would like to say thank you so much to our speakers for your presentation. I greatly enjoyed them and they were very helpful for my own research. In my experience of reading Chinese text translated into English, sometimes the translation inevitably change the subtle nuances of the text. My question is, how far do you think translation and language abilities impact the quality of research? I apologize for how long this is, but I also wanted to ask whether the speakers think non-textual sources such as opium objects, opium pipes, and mortuary records are important and helpful in the research on Southern Chinese. Thank you. Anyone would like to respond?
Anyone?
Maybe I respond for the first question. I agree that that's actually that's one of the challenges of research in general. But I guess there's actually no real answer to it. But it's a question of a compromise. A compromise in the sense that who is actually reading your work, and to what extent can you be as faithful to translation as possible? So for myself, I actually have to translate a few hagiographies and religious texts, and wow, that was and experience I will not forget. So the question is, yeah, it's really a compromise in the sense that you have to think about what your audience is interested in and whether that contextualizing and that rigor, does it really warrant an appendix, is also up to you and your assessment and note. So no real answer per se, more of a compromise and a contested negotiation between who is your reader and who you're writing for.
And maybe I can follow up on that. For my research as scholar of religion, I think material culture, like inscriptions, and objects are very important sources for research, especially on the Chinese in Southeast Asia. So I think absolutely.
Yeah, I think I agree with both Jack and Esmond. The question about translation is, of course, you need to know the context of whatever is being written. So it's not just about for the reader, but for the original person who was writing, what was he or she intending to convey with a certain word or character, right? And then the question of like whether you convey the same, because the same character might have different meanings, and it's very important. Yeah, so translation definitely is very important. I've heard of a source that was originally in Japanese, but the Chinese translation made a mistake, and then the English translation was based on the Chinese translation, and then you see the sort of the whole genealogy of mistakes. So yeah, then material objects are definitely important as and where they are available, but it's also important to contextualize the objects, to know the background, to be able to make sense of it. It's not just like having something from that period, because sometimes you see in archaeology and all that rather extravagant claims being made over the significance of certain object finds and all that. So we have to be careful in that sense. But I think that anything is important. Anything you can grab your hands on or lay your eyes on in terms of sources is important. Yeah. Even recordings, oral history, recordings of a certain period, film, right? So it's also very important. Yeah.
I guess photographs will be important if you are looking at a community among the subaltern Chinese, because that is one of the very few representations, not of themselves by themselves, but you could see some idea about what communities they were affiliating themselves with, if you can identify them based on face alone.
Yeah. But it's also important to remember, to think about who took the photograph, why he or she specifically framed that segment, these people, the whole context of the photograph is also very important. So the visual has a certain appeal, but we need to be conscious of the dynamics behind the visualization of a certain particular scene and all that. Yeah, it's quite important as well.
Gio has a question. Can you tell us more about collections from Japanese libraries? I have the impression that they might have good collection of old, rare overseas Chinese newspapers. And I think our librarian Chai Kim has responded to the question, but I just wondered if you'd like to add.
Okay, we must see Chai Kim's response first. Okay. I personally don't know about old rare overseas Chinese newspapers in Japan, but I know that in one of the universities of foreign languages in Tokyo, they actually had a collection of materials belonging to a former Indonesian language teacher from Java or from Indonesia, who went there in the 60s. And many of the materials were actually publications, newspapers, magazines of the leftist movements of the time in Java, if I'm not wrong. I think maybe Chai Kim will know about it, or the other person whom I know she has actually seen the collection will be Sai Xiumin, if you can contact her somewhere in Taiwan. So she has seen the collection. But if you're looking at old overseas Chinese newspapers, right? Of course, NUS Libraries, one of the most extensive for Singapore. But in Xiamen University, the Research School of Southeast Asian Studies, right? I think they must have digitized it already. They have an extensive collection of 1950s and 60s newspapers. From many of them, as I mentioned earlier, brought back by Chinese who returned to China during the 50s and 60s due to nationalist policies and other policies in Southeast Asia. So that might be one collection you want to look at if you're interested in that period. Of course, I mean, in Japan, I don't know if Professor Choi is still in the audience, but if he is, then he would be able to give you a better idea of the newspaper sources in the
he's in the audience.
Yes.
He mentioned try the Japanese Center for Asian Historical Records.
Okay. Yes, JACA, yes. Yeah, so that's also Professor Choi is of course the person to go to. You can message him to get his personal contact details for materials in Japan. Yeah.
And also, if I may add,
Yes.
my new colleague, Dr. Clay Eaton, who has just joined our Japanese Studies department, is an expert on the Japanese in Southeast Asia. So he might be someone that you can consult regarding sources on Southeast Asia in Japanese. Right? Do we have any more questions in the chat box? We don't have question. Clarence say thank you, Prof. Koh, Jeremy, and Esmond. Lim Peng say thank you, Jeremy, and Samuel Tan commented we should have more of this Zoom sharing sessions. Thank you for all speakers. So if we don't have any more questions, maybe I can end the session by thanking all our presenters for their fascinating presentations and insightful response to the questions. And I will now hand the time over to our MC, Chai Kim.
Maybe before Chai Kim takes over, I would like also to extend my thanks on maybe behalf of Jeremy and Esmond, also to all the librarians in NUS Library who have helped us. And I think I mentioned the names earlier, but I might have left out some names. I think, so there are many, right? I think including, as I mentioned just now, Mr. Lee, Tim, Chin Peng, Yong Mei, Chai Kim, Ming Guang, and Herman, and many others. I think, basically, many others in the library who I've seen who have retired. So, yeah, going back to NUS Library always brings back certain emotions for us who use the library all the time there. Okay, sorry.
Awesome. So thank you, and please join me in thanking our speakers and more importantly, our NUS librarians. Thank you so much for all your support and help.
Yeah.
Thank you. And over to you, Chai Kim.
Thanks. A big thank you to all the three speakers, Dr. Koh, Jeremy, Esmond, as well as the moderator, Dr. Cha, for having the engaging and wonderful discussion. We would like to thank all the participants for joining this seminar with us in this beautiful morning. May all of you have a nice day and hope to see you again in our library events. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks everyone.